Oh, the rivalry. Spain versus Portugal. The similarities, the differences. Which one's better? I'm Josh with Expats Everywhere.
And I'm Kalie. Let's start with cost of living.
All right, so just to give you a little background, Kalie and I have lived in both Spain and Portugal, although Spain was over a decade ago.
We were young.
Cost of living has changed, but let's talk about cost of living now. Cost of living is still cheaper despite some of the increases in rent. It is still cheaper in Portugal.
Right. I think that rent is probably the big variable here because right now, at least currently, rent's really high in Portugal, whereas it's pretty stable in Spain. So you can find, I think there's a lot more inventory in Spain as well, right?
Yeah, for sure. Taking out rent from the equation, because that will be the big expense and kind of what will be quite variable depending on where you live or depending on the quality of accommodations you have. If you're talking about your other expenses, it is cheaper according to Numbeo and actually physically being there, because we've done this as well. It is cheaper, maybe marginally, in Portugal.
Right, so thinking about food, groceries, going out.
Utilities.
Food, right, all of that would be cheaper in Portugal. So Portugal for the win.
It is. Portugal for the win, although just.
Yeah.
Not
slight.
a huge difference.
Slight.
Next is safety.
Okay, this one I think is quite easy, but instead of just saying which one it is right off the bat, let's compare the two. As far as crime rate goes, I think when you think of crime here, I think more are non-violent. Well, no, I mean, when I'm comparing both anyway.
Okay.
Both would be more like the non-violent crime. So I think the big difference is how often pickpocketing happens.
Yep.
What do you think?
Well, pickpocketing definitely happens a lot more in Spain, certainly in Madrid compared to Lisbon, if we're going to compare the two capitals, or Barcelona as well, being kind of a quasi-capital in a way. Basically, major city. You can compare both Lisbon and Madrid and Barcelona kind of together, right? Because of size of cities and whatnot. And in cities, you tend to have more crime than in towns. So in that way, for sure, it's more dangerous, let's say, in Spain.
Right.
I think the problem that one might find here in Portugal, car break-ins happens. So some of the personal property crime does happen, but it does happen in Spain as well.
Right.
You know, if you look at kind of the data would point to Portugal being better, safer, whether it be personal property or threat of violence in Portugal versus Spain.
And obviously it depends city to city,
For sure.
town to town, but if we're going by just the whole country, then it would have to be Portugal for the win.
Portugal for the win.
And both of them are quite low, I'd say, in violent type crimes, right?
Yeah.
So it's more, the biggest difference would be things like pickpocketing is much higher in Spain.
Yep, and this is comparing them to each other, not comparing them to maybe the U.S.
Other parts of the world, yeah.
Right? Or UK.
Okay, so that's Portugal for the win.
2-0. All right, food. This one is going to be very contentious, although I will say that we will have a outside analytic to look at this.
Okay.
But let's talk about this from a personal point of view.
This is a tough one because for me, I think when I'm in one country, I miss the other country's food. So it's like, okay, I'm in Portugal now, so maybe I miss Spanish food, but we've been there several times recently. And I would say I get a little tired of some of the fried foods. I do like something like a croquette, but maybe too much of it. I'm like, okay, I can't do any more fried foods. And it's not that Portugal doesn't do it. They mainly do more like fries, or they have their risóis and stuff, but maybe don't eat it as much as maybe you would the fried foods for tapas in Spain. So I like Spanish food, but sometimes it can be a bit heavy.
Yes, I agree with all that.
Okay.
I will say this, if I'm thinking about kind of globally, thinking about well-known cuisines, for sure, Portugal isn't on there, whereas Spain is.
Yeah.
Like if you're thinking about tapas, for example, like having a tapas restaurant in London or having a tapas restaurant in some other major city in the world, you'll find that. Whereas to try to find a Portuguese restaurant, it's much more difficult.
That's a good point, yeah.
So why? It's like, why is that? Portuguese cuisine hasn't changed, but it does seem like Portuguese cuisine has now popped up on people's radars just recently.
Right.
But you still don't find Portuguese cuisine in global cities the way you do Japanese, Chinese, Indian, Greek, Spanish even. Spanish to a lesser extent. Italian for sure.
Yeah, that's true.
So I feel like I'm leaning towards Spain. But I will say this. My experience from living in both, and really just thinking about not individual dishes, but just kind of like the collective, they're very similar. Very similar types of...
People are going to not be happy about that comment.
They might not, but it's like very similar plate constructions. Each region is kind of known for their thing, and they're very proud of their thing. But there are specific dishes in both countries that set them apart, and people love and people have in their hearts. But
that's a good point, though, that you brought up with the different regions. It is very regional about what types of dishes you can get for both countries. But if we're looking at Spain, let's say if you're up in Galicia, you have more of like the octopus because it's on the water.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're central, you might have more of the meat dishes.
Yes.
And then the south has a lot of like the Moorish influence. So you get a lot of the rice dishes. I mean, paella is a really big one that's well known for Spain. But then in Portugal, you also have, like if you go into Alentejo, they're known for like their pork, like the black pork.
Yes.
They also have the cod. So they have regional stuff as well. Ooh, it's difficult actually.
It's difficult, but let's take a look at something outside of just our opinion. And on Taste Atlas, this year, Taste Atlas ranked Portuguese food ahead of Spanish food. Spanish was like 9th best cuisine. Portugal was 4th. So Portugal for the win.
Portugal moving on up. So, okay, we're giving it to Portugal.
Yep.
Wow, coming out strong with Portugal.
We are. All right, so let's move on and talk about kind of the options, the variety of cities that one could find themselves either traveling in or living in. So this would go to like size, amenities, things to do, how multicultural, multinational they are. What do you think?
Spain is just bigger, geographically bigger. So I think that gives it the option, the opportunity, I guess you could say, to have more of a variety. And there is a lot of variety as far as cities go in Spain. Portugal does have variety as well, but maybe a little less. And some of the towns might seem quite similar. The only thing that might be different with the towns is their location. So maybe climate could be different. But as far as like feel, vibe, my word, the towns might feel a little more similar as opposed to, I think, the Spanish towns and cities have their own thing going on a bit more than Portugal does.
Yeah, for sure. And I think if you're looking at living in a larger city, you're going to have more options in Spain versus if you're looking for a town or more kind of local, intimate setting, you'll find that in both.
Yes, that's true. You have that in both. So Spain gives bigger cities, a lot more bigger city options.
A lot more.
Rather than Portugal does.
Yeah, it's kind of not even fair. It's not even a real comparison, but it is something that you should consider if you're looking to immigrate to either place. You should consider like what size place do I want to live in and how many options of that thing will I have. We're kind of becoming second city people, so that's why we love living in Porto. But there are some really great second cities in Spain that are much larger than Porto even.
Very true. And they have more second cities, right? So whereas in Portugal, it's like Lisbon, Porto, right?
And then the drop
And then
off.
it drops. But there are a lot more options in Spain for like second cities as far as size and feel goes.
Exactly. So for the win,
Spain.
All right, next up is language. And maybe to some this will be a contentious one. But I think that there should be a very straightforward and logical answer.
I agree.
But let's talk about it. We're comparing Spanish versus Portuguese. Now, the funny thing about this to me as an American is that the version of both languages, at least from an American perspective, is influenced by Latin America. It's influenced by our neighbors to the south.
Yes.
Mexico and Brazil.
Yes, that's right. So while we do have an influence of Spanish and Portuguese in the U.S., it's different, right? Because it's not European.
It sounds different.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Well, they use different words. They have different accents. So it's not European. So there is a difference there, which we definitely experienced when we moved to Spain. And we're like, oh yeah, we took Spanish in school. We have a good foundation. And then you get there and you're like,
well, and also the funny thing is, like, in school, if you're an American and you grew up, I guess, in like the 90s and 2000s like we did, and you took your Spanish 101 class, the teachers, all of the teachers I had, and there were multiple, would talk about, okay, there's this form called the vosotros. Don't worry about it.
You'll never need that. You'll
The only place
never
that
use
uses it is Spain. And then the first place that I moved to is Spain.
That's so true. It was the same with us. And sometimes, depending, on which year it was, Spanish was like the easy class to take and the fun one or whatever, depending. So I think we do have a foundation there, but it's, I think it's gotten better in schools, a little more intense and a little more intentional on learning the language. But I do think also too, in schools, if you only have a couple language options, you're going to have Spanish, maybe French, maybe German, and then maybe get into like Latin, Greek, stuff like that. But I don't think Portuguese
have the exposure.
Is offered in most schools, I would say.
Yeah.
So there's that.
Another aspect to this whole language thing is how well both countries do in terms of English speaking, English levels. Portugal is better than Spain, like by some margins. I think Spain is catching up. Certainly whenever we lived in Spain, it was more difficult to get by if you didn't know Spanish, like getting by just on English. There were communities of English speakers, whether it be people that are native English speakers or second language English speakers that are not Spanish. There were plenty of people actually we met that were not Spanish and not a native English speaker, but they spoke English fluently.
Right.
So therefore, like, they were kind of absorbed into that English-speaking community.
Right, because you will need to know Spanish, like if you jump on a bus, for example, like the bus driver, when we were there, it's gotten better, but when we were there, it was like, there was no English. So you need to be able to communicate about where you were going, if you need to get a ticket or anything like that.
Yeah.
So that's true. Portugal definitely has a higher language, English-speaking proficiency than Spain does.
Yes.
So English would be Portugal, but then I think exposure and how many more countries speak Spanish, and maybe the ease actually of learning Spanish would be Spain, because I think that Spanish is a little more of a straightforward, easier language to learn.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that the resources for Spanish learning as well are more robust. There's more media for you to consume. So it's got to be Spain. Next up, let's talk about culture and society. So this would be like the friendliness of the people, the warmth, the family-oriented nature of the places. What do you think? There's some similarities.
There are. I think that they are both very much so a family-oriented, young kid type of society where they bring them into that. So when you're at a restaurant, it's common to see young kids there. Late at night, at festivals and such, it's common to see young kids there, which is really nice, because I think for us, like in the US, the UK, generally you get a babysitter, right? Or you don't take the kids out to a restaurant or something. It's very much so the kids stay at home, or you stay at home with the kids, which is a bit of a bummer.
Yeah.
So I like that both cultures are very family oriented for little ones and for the older generation as well. Some people live with their parents for quite a while, or their parents come back and live with them, and that's a common thing.
Yeah, no, I agree. The other aspect of that is like the friendliness of the people. I find both Spanish and Portuguese to be friendly. I do find, at least from an American perspective, it easier to get on with Portuguese people in terms of their communication style versus Spanish. That could change depending on what language you're having the conversation in. So, for example, if you know Spanish really well and you're having that conversation in Spanish, the style of conversation is very different than if you're like having to have that conversation in English, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I've heard from some of my American friends that have gone to Spain, knowing Spanish really well or being fluent at Spanish, having an easier time integrating than people that don't know Spanish, and they're trying to like clunk their way through the language as a tourist.
Yeah.
So for me, Portuguese are just warmer, more patient, and easier going when it comes to communication.
And I think that if we're talking about just complete strangers walking on a street in any sort of city, like say you're on vacation and you're in a city, I think overall Portuguese, coming across a Portuguese person, they're going to be much kinder than a Spanish person.
Totally agree.
Stranger-wise, I think that the Portuguese are a much friendlier culture in that sense. Once you get to know both cultures, I think then the Spanish are a little softer, I guess, a little more open. The Portuguese are already like that just as strangers. So personally, I think that the Portuguese are way friendlier of a culture overall.
Yeah. And comparing cultures as well, us being Americans again, Americans get a bad rap for being like very loud and boisterous, especially like in public areas. Portuguese people think that they oftentimes are loud and boisterous, but definitely the Spanish are loud and boisterous.
Yeah.
So when we go out onto the streets here in Porto, or whenever we're in Lisbon, you can tell a Spanish tourist from a mile away.
Oh, yes.
You can hear them from 2 miles away.
And then also too, just walking around the streets here in Porto, if someone, for example, I'm pushing the stroller because we have a daughter, and someone's standing in the way, you can tell right away who is Spanish and who is Portuguese if it's one of those cultures, because generally the Portuguese, like I think Americans, Canadians do, when you realize you're in the way, oh, sorry, you know, they're very quick to move out of the way, say they're sorry, or if one friend catches it, you know, moves the other friend over, whereas generally the Spanish don't move.
No,
and they definitely don't say they're sorry that they're all up in the way. So I think, again, this is where, in my opinion, the Portuguese is a much friendlier culture.
I agree. So who gets the win?
Portugal.
All right, so we're talking about culture and society, and Kalie and I have lived abroad for 15 years, and we're gonna get to visit a place that we used to live in coming up soon when we head to Nomad Capitalist Live.
Yes, so we're heading back to Southeast Asia. We used to live in Singapore, and this year, Nomad Capitalist Live 2024 is going to be in Kuala Lumpur, a place that we visited a lot.
I love Kuala Lumpur.
Because it was so close. It's a great city. There's so much going on. It's going to be a really great conference. Lots of networking, lots of good information. So we're excited to attend, and actually we're heading back there. We haven't been back to that part of the world in 5 years, and our daughter is going to experience it. So we're excited for her to see, I guess, the craziness of Kuala Lumpur, the food, but she'll be there with us, and then we'll be experiencing the conference as well.
Yeah, so like Kalie said, the conference is about networking. It's about learning, whether it be learning about taxes or investment opportunities or second citizenships. It's about learning and networking with people that are living a dream maybe that you have, living in a part of the world that maybe you want to go to. So if you're interested in networking with people that are doing something that you've wanted to do, then Nomad Capitalist Live is the place where you can do that, and you can connect with us in Kuala Lumpur there in September.
Yes, in September. Andrew Henderson, he's so knowledgeable, and they're bringing in some great speakers, some really top people in the field who have done a lot of great things. So showing them and just being able to listen to what they have to say and meeting them hopefully is going to be really cool. So September, and you can check the link in the description to sign up for that.
Yeah, and we'll also show you a bit more about that later in this video. Let's roll on to healthcare.
Healthcare, okay, this is a good one, because I think a lot of people come to Portugal, or they're thinking about Portugal, and they're like, oh, I hear the healthcare is really good, which is true. It is, you know, I think people want to make sure that it's like top of the line, that they know what they're doing, and the healthcare is good here. They've got public and private, but what about Spain?
So how do they compare to Spain? Well, actually, Spain, in all of the research we did, ranks marginally higher than in Portugal. First-hand experience-wise, we have 0 in Spain. We lived there 2 years. Not sick a day, never had to miss work. So we didn't experience it firsthand. What we can say about our experiences in Portugal is they have been good, although sometimes things can be a little clunky in terms of like when there might be strikes that happen.
That's true, in the public system.
In the public system, that can change appointments. If you're going private has been phenomenal for us, very easy, very inexpensive. But looking at it statistically, the winner is...
Well, before you say that, I would say you mentioned strikes, but Spain is known for their strikes as well. So I imagine that in
they
the public
probably
system,
have their strikes as well.
Yes, and they're both very similar, that tax dollars go a lot towards the public system, but we do know that in Portugal it's a little overwhelmed as well in the public system.
Yeah.
So I think that is an issue too. So
which is why the winner is Spain.
So then moving on from healthcare, the next one is infrastructure.
Yeah, infrastructure is, in a way, you could kind of be like, oh, if the cities are like this, the infrastructure is like that, and it's similar. But I think the infrastructure in both countries is very dependent on the economic situations of both countries. I do think that Portugal, and what I mean by that is Spain has better economics than Portugal. But I do think that in terms of public money, Portugal has done a good job, and they're trying to do a good job of building up their infrastructure, improving their infrastructure. But Spain just has way more money that it can throw at its infrastructure. You know, despite its size being 5x of what Portugal's is, and you would think, okay, they've got 5x the money that Portugal does, they have more than that to throw at infrastructure, and they do. And they do a great job, and they have beautiful architecture, like new modern architecture. Some of the best architects in the world, most renowned, are coming out of Spain. I mean,
I know, I think it's tough for Portugal because I think they have a lot of catching up to do.
Sure.
And so they're trying to do it, and they're putting money, like you said, towards it, but they still have a long way to go. And while they do have some beautiful architecture in their cities. Sometimes maybe it looks a little similar in different towns, a lot of the similar type of architecture that's older, but then you're not getting also like the modern aspect of it either. Whereas I also think in Spain, you just get these grand streets where these like, not high rises, they're older buildings, but like really high and grand, and you'd have a lot less of that in Portugal. And that goes a little bit back to the cities as well, right? What the cities look like. So overall infrastructure, Spain just has more train
I was going to say
travel,
railways and roads and there's
buildings. So winner?
Spain.
Spain.
Okay, next up is quality of life.
Quality of life, okay.
So quality of life does have indexes that we could look at. We can also talk about our personal experience.
Of course.
So let's start maybe with personal experience and then we can kind of give it to the indexes.
I think it's quite similar because of the similar lifestyle that each one has culturally. You know, that's you eat late at night, you stay up later. There's, you know, if you're young and you want to go out, that's definitely available in both. So like when we lived in Spain, that was what we did. Now it's a little bit of a different stage of life, but still fine. Still nice that you can go out again, like with a child. But I think it's quite similar. This is a tough one. It's quite similar.
Yeah, no, I think it's definitely a close one. I think a lot of times when you look at indices, you'll have the purchasing power, which is something that you have to take into consideration. However, for most retirees or people that are bringing jobs from outside of either Portugal or Spain, your, let's say, dollars are more fixed, so you're not earning on the local economy. So purchasing power kind of gets thrown out of the window. You'd honestly look for which country is cheaper, like less expensive, which it would be Portugal. So purchasing power is one where definitely Spain has the advantage.
Right, and I think that plays into overall
Wages
happiness.
are higher.
Overall happiness as well, right? So if you have a higher purchasing power, you make more wages, you're able to travel or maybe do things that you want to do.
Poverty's less.
Right, so I think as far as quality of life goes, you find that maybe the Spanish are happier because of stuff like that.
Yeah, so...
Not that Portuguese aren't happy, but you know, I think overall happiness is something that plays into quality of life too.
Yeah, my rebuttal to that is Portugal does have better safety, does have better pollution ratings.
That's true, yeah.
So that's something to take into consideration. So if you're not talking about earning on the local economy, then maybe you would edge it to Portugal. But if we are looking at the indices and the quality of life index, it's close, but
It's close.
Spain.
Spain.
Let's move on to climate and weather.
Okay, I think this is a tough one just because they both offer a lot of variety, but obviously with Spain being bigger, I know we've said that before, maybe it has a bit more variety.
Yeah, no, it has more variety. The coast here in Portugal, you're talking about the Atlantic coast, throws a few more storm systems our way. So it gives some, certainly in the north from like Lisbon up or above Lisbon, you tend to have some more rain, more grayer days. You don't tend to find that in Spain except, well, the north of Spain, Galicia, Cantabria.
Gets
but
a
then,
little bit, yeah.
But then if you want to talk about spectacular weather, that Mediterranean coast is phenomenal.
Yes, yeah, the Mediterranean, the water is just not as cold as the Atlantic. You don't get those types of storms. It's calmer water, but it also gets pretty hot there.
It does. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, you're talking about southern Spain
Yes.
is famed for people falling out.
Yeah, it's pretty hot.
Yeah.
And then the center of Spain can also get hot in the
It's
summers because
hot and dry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because right there in the middle.
It is.
Although Alentejo in Portugal can get pretty hot too.
Yes.
So
But I think if we look at it overall and the variety of what you could choose from in terms of climate, you're going to have more variety to fit whatever your desired lifestyle is in Spain.
and we're not saying that Portugal doesn't have variety, but Spain is just going to offer more variety. So although this is close, we're going with
Spain.
Earlier, I mentioned Andrew Henderson from Nomad Capitalist and that we are going to Nomad Capitalist Live 2024 in Kuala Lumpur. So before we get to the next category, which is going to be taxes, we want you to take a look at Nomad Capitalist because they do a lot of country comparisons. They know what they're talking about with taxes, with golden visas, with all sorts of things. So let's go ahead and take a look at what Nomad Capitalist Live 2024 is going to look like.
All right, thanks for taking a look at what Nomad Capitalist Live is going to be like. We hope to see you there. And please check out the link in the description section below if you're interested. Now let's talk taxes. What are taxes like now in 2024 and moving forward for both Portugal and Spain? NHR has changed, and many people are not going to be able to take the benefits like in the past. So maybe both Portugal and Spain are more on equal footing.
Right, because I think before NHR, then it would definitely be Portugal because of that great tax break that you would get for 10 years.
Yes.
So a lot of people freaked out when they did away with that, which is understandable.
Yes.
But because taxes are high in both.
Yeah.
And they both work on a progressive scale.
They do.
So
they both kind of have similar top ends, although the amount of money earned to be in different tax brackets is different.
So this is a tough one because, again, high percentages, but I think also Spain throws in a few little sneaky ones.
Well, this is what I was going to say I don't like about Spain. There's a wealth tax and there's an exit tax.
Yeah.
So the wealth tax is if you have in your assets a certain amount of money, then each year you have a very small percentage, but a percentage nonetheless, of tax on those assets, which to me is bonkers. Like that's a crazy, crazy tax.
But also that one
I don't care how much it is. That's just mad.
That they would even have that. It also depends on where you live though, right? Not every place in Spain, not every region. I think that's a regional thing, but like most regions have it.
Sure.
Right? So you could potentially avoid it, but probably the places you're looking to live would have it.
Yeah.
So you've got that and then the exit tax, leaving.
Yes.
That's like you're leaving here, so
We're
pay a
gonna
tax.
get you. Yeah. Now I've heard the US is going to introduce that, but speaking about Spain specifically, yeah, if you've earned certain monies in Spain while living there, essentially like benefiting from that system, that economy, then you'll be taxed on it when you leave. A lot of expats are considering living somewhere for some time and then going abroad, or moving, changing countries, returning to their home country, whatever it is, instead of like just staying for the rest of their life in that place. So an exit tax is something that you would need to take into consideration.
Plan for, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So because their taxes are similar and Spain has two additional things that we're not really keen on.
But they also have the Beckham law too, but that won't apply to everyone.
No,
right?
no,
So
that's
I think a lot of
high net
people
earners
did
from
talk
outside.
about NHR and Beckham law being like the same thing, which they're not really the same thing.
No,
so
they're
they
not.
do offer that, which is a good thing, but then they have the wealth and the exit tax, whereas Portugal has just done away with NHR. So it's a tough one, but the winner is
Portugal.
Portugal.
All right, so if we compare our winners from both sides, we will find that there is a winner, 6-5. However, let's now talk about what that looks like, because I think that for me personally, I would weight each category differently. I wouldn't just say each win is 1 point. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure. And you have to also say what is the most important to you. What do you prioritize? Is it something like safety over infrastructure? Because then you've got Portugal winning safety and Spain winning infrastructure, but what do you prioritize?
Okay, so the winner is just on straight up score 6-5 in favor of Spain. But is Spain the winner for you?
Oh, this is a tough one. I like, there are pros and cons to both. I like both. So I think that it wouldn't have surprised me if we went through these categories and it was tied because they are so nice. So I think it just depends on where you're going to be is one thing, and what you're looking for as far as a lifestyle, because they do fit different lifestyles. For me, where we are right now is perfect for the lifestyle that we live in. And for me also as well, safety is a really big thing. For me as a female, for me with a young kid, safety is good. But also too, I like living in a place that is family friendly, which fits for both. So there are pros and cons to both, but for me, I still think that the stage of life we're in right now, it's Portugal. You?
Yeah, I mean, the way I look at it is very much from my personal situation, which is being an income earner, earning income from abroad, not domestically. So whether I'm living in Portugal or living in Spain, the income that I'm earning is independent of those places. In saying that, what I'm trying to say with that is that if you're looking at job opportunities or work opportunities domestically, then Spain would be the clear winner. It would give you higher income. I think, like we said, higher quality of life, better options, those types of things. Does not surprise me that Spain wins here. However, I think for those that are earning income from abroad, bringing that money into a country, the money goes further in Portugal. The options of places to live here are still very nice. We've traveled the country from north to south, south to north.
Both countries, actually.
Both countries. We found home in Portugal. Whenever we were living in Spain and traveling to Portugal, we were always like, why don't we live there? We like the people a lot there, you know? So I think in that regard, very personally, Portugal is my winner because I would have the option to live in Spain, and I chose Portugal, and I love Portugal.
So if you want to see us compare Portugal and Italy, another place that we've been to a lot, then check out this video right here. Now, let's get moving.
Bye.